The sleek black SUV moved quietly along a deserted suburban street, its engine barely audible. Inside, Carla Davis, a composed and confident woman in her early 40s, leaned back in her seat, enjoying a moment of peace after a demanding day. Carla wasn't just any professional. She held a prominent role as the head of a national security agency. Yet, tonight, her focus wasn't on work. She was eager to get home, enjoy a quiet meal, and relax with a favorite novel. The street was almost empty, with just a few scattered cars under the soft glow of streetlights. Carla's headlights illuminated the road ahead, the stillness interrupted only by the steady hum of the tires. Suddenly, in her rearview mirror, she noticed flashing red and blue lights. A sharp wail of a siren followed, signaling her to pull over. Carla's calm moment evaporated, replaced by confusion. She hadn't violated any traffic laws. Her speed was within the limit, and her driving flawless. Nonetheless, she eased her SUV to the side of the road and brought it to a stop. As she lowered her window, a tall, stern-looking officer approached, his badge reflecting the light. His name tag read Officer Trent Harper, and his expression was cold, almost hostile. "Good evening," Carla said politely, trying to gauge the situation. "License and registration," Trent demanded without preamble, his voice sharp and devoid of courtesy. Carla complied, retrieving her documents and handing them over. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" she inquired, her tone calm but firm. Trent barely glanced at the papers before snapping. "Routine security check." Carla frowned slightly, but maintained her composure. "Is there a specific reason for this check?" "I'm not aware of any issues with my vehicle." Ignoring her question, Trent turned on his heel and walked back to his patrol car, leaving Carla alone with her thoughts. This wasn't the first time she had faced unwarranted scrutiny, and while her position often shielded her from overt bias, moments like these reminded her of the barriers she had fought her entire career to overcome. A few minutes later, Trent returned, holding her documents. "You need to show me a second form of ID," he said, his tone even more curt. Carla raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "I've already provided my license and registration. What additional ID do you need, and why?" Trent's smirk hinted at irritation. "Your attitude is suspicious. Driving a car like this, it raises questions." Carla felt her patience wane, but remained composed. "Officer, my documents are in order, and I've broken no laws. What exactly are you accusing me of?" Trent's demeanor grew harsher. "I don't need to explain myself to you. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to detain you for questioning." Carla's grip on the steering wheel tightened, her voice steady. "Officer Harper, your request for further identification is unnecessary and outside your authority. If you have no legitimate reason for detaining me, I suggest we end this interaction." Trent's face hardened, his posture stiffening. "You think you can tell me how to do my job? People like you think you're untouchable, don't you?" Carla's expression didn't waver. "I don't think I'm untouchable, officer. I think I know my rights." The tension between them was electric. Trent leaned closer, his voice a harsh whisper. "Keep pushing, and you'll find out just how much authority I have." Carla met his gaze without flinching. "Authority isn't the same as justice, officer. I'd suggest you think carefully about how you're using yours." The officer's hand drifted toward his belt, brushing near his holstered weapon, a deliberate show of dominance. Carla noticed, but refused to react, her voice remaining calm. "Threatening a compliant driver isn't part of your job, Officer Harper. If you continue, you're only making matters worse for yourself." Trent's frustration boiled over, and he slammed his hand on the roof of her car. "You don't know who you're messing with," he barked. "You're just another driver, and I'm the one in control here." Carla took a slow, deep breath, her resolve unwavering. "Control doesn't mean abusing power. I suggest you think twice before you act, officer." The standoff continued, the air thick with unspoken tension. Dana's gaze didn't falter. She had faced far more intimidating challenges than this, on stages much larger than a dimly lit roadside. "You might want to reconsider your approach," she said calmly. "This isn't just about me. Your actions tonight could have serious consequences for your career." Mason let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "My career? You think I care about your opinions?" His hand inched closer to his holstered gun. "This is your last warning." Dana felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her exterior calm. This wasn't just about her safety. It was about addressing a larger, systemic issue. Slowly and deliberately, she reached for her phone, holding it up so Mason could see. "What do you think you're doing?" Mason barked, suspicion lacing his voice. Dana pressed a button on speed dial and raised the phone to her ear. "Making a call," she said simply. "To someone who outranks you." The line connected, and Dana spoke with her usual composed authority. "This is Dana Collins. I'm being unlawfully detained by a police officer. I need the sheriff to respond immediately." Mason's confident demeanor wavered, and his eyes darted nervously to the phone. "Who are you calling?" he demanded, his tone less certain. Dana didn't address him directly. Instead, she relayed her exact location to the person on the other end of the call. "Thank you," she said firmly, ending the call. She turned back to Mason, her expression unyielding. "The sheriff will be here shortly. I'd suggest you carefully consider your next steps." Mason's bravado began to crack. His hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't draw it. His face reddened with frustration and unease. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, though his confidence was clearly fading. Before long, the unmistakable flash of additional red and blue lights appeared in the distance. A larger vehicle came into view, and moments later, it pulled to a stop behind Mason's patrol car. Sheriff Miguel Alvarez, a middle-aged Latino man with a strong, authoritative presence, stepped out. His seasoned eyes quickly surveyed the tense scene. "Officer Hill," Sheriff Alvarez called out sharply, his voice brimming with irritation. "What's going on here?" Mason stiffened, attempting to stand taller. "Sir, this driver refused to comply. She wouldn't show additional ID, and she's being uncooperative." "Holster your weapon and step back from the vehicle," Alvarez interrupted, his voice firm. His eyes locked on Mason, assessing him with a mix of disappointment and anger. "Are you seriously escalating a situation with an unarmed civilian?" Mason hesitated, then reluctantly moved his hand away from his holster. "I was just doing my job," he mumbled defensively. Alvarez's expression hardened. "Your job doesn't include harassing citizens or acting outside the law," he snapped. "Step aside." Mason stepped back reluctantly, his posture tense. Alvarez approached Dana's vehicle, his demeanor shifting to one of calm professionalism. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady, "are you all right?" Dana nodded, her tone level but firm. "I'm fine, but Officer Hill's conduct tonight was entirely inappropriate. His actions were not only excessive but also illegal." Alvarez studied her carefully, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her presence. "Director Collins," he said slowly, the realization evident in his tone. Mason froze in place, his face blanching. "Director," he echoed faintly. Dana met Alvarez's gaze without hesitation. "Yes, I'm Dana Collins, Director of National Intelligence." A heavy silence fell over the scene. Mason's mouth opened as though to respond, but no words came out. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as the weight of the situation sunk in. Alvarez turned sharply to Mason, his voice dropping to a cold, authoritative tone. "Do you realize what you've just done? You detained and harassed the Director of National Intelligence without cause, intimidated her, and blatantly disregarded protocol. Your behavior is unacceptable and an embarrassment to this department." Mason stammered, I didn't know who she was, sir. You were just overstepping your authority," Dana interjected firmly. "It doesn't matter who I am. No one should have to face this kind of abuse." Alvarez nodded, his jaw tightening. "She's absolutely right." Mason returned to the station immediately. "File a detailed report about this incident. I'll deal with you personally." Mason glanced helplessly between Alvarez and Dana, his confidence completely shattered. "But no excuses," Alvarez snapped. "Now!" With one last glance at Dana, Mason retreated to his car and drove away, his earlier arrogance replaced by humiliation. Dana sat silently, watching as the sheriff turned back to her with an apologetic expression. "I deeply regret what you experienced tonight, Director," Alvarez said. "I'll ensure that Officer Hill is held accountable for his actions. Dana nodded, her voice firm. Thank you, Sheriff. I trust you'll follow through. This kind of behavior has no place in law enforcement. The tension in the air slowly began to dissipate, but the gravity of the confrontation lingered. Dana remained composed, determined that this incident would be a catalyst for change. Mason finally gave in, his movements stiff and reluctant as he walked back to his patrol car. The tension in the air began to thin as his vehicle pulled away, but the weight of the incident remained heavy. Sheriff Alvarez turned back to Dana, his expression laden with regret. Director Collins, he said respectfully, his voice softer now, I want to personally apologize for what you endured tonight. Officer Hill's behavior was inexcusable and does not reflect the standards of this department. I assure you, he will be held accountable. Dana's gaze remained steady, her tone measured. Thank you, Sheriff Alvarez, she replied. But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else has to experience what I just did. Alvarez nodded, a shadow of shame passing across his face. You have my word, he said firmly. We will conduct a full investigation, and this incident will not be ignored. Dana studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp. Then she nodded. I hope you follow through, she said, her tone resolute. As Alvarez reiterated his commitment, Dana knew the matter wasn't truly settled. She had stood her ground tonight, but the broader fight against systemic injustice and misuse of power had only just begun. The story of Dana Collins' encounter with Officer Mason Hill didn't stay confined to the quiet suburban street for long. By morning, the incident had gone viral, fueled by videos taken by bystanders. Clips of Mason's condescending tone, his aggressive behavior, and his clear misuse of authority spread rapidly across social media. Headlines such as Top Intelligence Official Harassed by Local Police and Officer Under Fire for Abusing Power Against Federal Director dominated news outlets. The public response was immediate and impassioned. Civil rights advocates, national leaders, and advocacy organizations spoke out, condemning Mason's actions and calling for systemic changes. Sheriff Alvarez, already reeling from the gravity of the situation, acted swiftly to address the growing backlash. He called a press conference, standing solemnly before a room packed with reporters and cameras flashing in rapid succession. Good morning, Alvarez began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Last night, a deeply troubling incident occurred involving one of our officers, Mason Hill, and Director Dana Collins. I want to be clear. Officer Hill's behavior was unacceptable and falls far below the standards we set for ourselves in this department. He paused, scanning the room. An internal investigation is already underway, he continued. Officer Hill has been placed on administrative leave pending the results. I've also reviewed the available body camera footage, which confirms multiple violations of protocol and professional conduct. The reporters erupted with questions, but Alvarez raised a hand to silence them. Let me assure you, this investigation will be thorough, transparent, and fair. We owe that to Director Collins and to the public we serve. Meanwhile, Dana prepared to address the media later that afternoon. Dressed in a sleek black suit, she stepped onto a stage at a press briefing organized by her office. The room fell silent as she approached the podium, her presence commanding. I want to start by thanking everyone who has reached out with their support, Dana began, her voice steady and resolute. What happened last night was not just a personal affront. It was a reflection of deeper, systemic issues that continue to affect communities across this country. Her words resonated deeply with those listening. This is bigger than one person or one incident, she continued. It's about ensuring accountability is not a privilege reserved for the few, but a standard upheld for all. Thunderous applause filled the room as Dana stepped back from the podium, her message ringing clear. The public's outrage only intensified as more details emerged. Footage from Mason's body camera corroborated Dana's account, showing his unprofessional conduct and blatant misuse of authority. Audio captured his inflammatory comments, including, "Someone like you driving a car like this, it doesn't add up." The evidence was undeniable, and calls for justice echoed nationwide. Social media campaigns under hashtags like #JusticeForDana and #AccountabilityNow gained traction, sparking nationwide conversations about police reform. For Mason, the fallout was swift. Stripped of his badge and facing public disgrace, he issued a brief apology in a local interview. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice subdued. "I allowed my biases to cloud my judgment, and I regret my actions." Though his apology was acknowledged, it did little to quell the growing demands for systemic change. Under mounting pressure, Sheriff Alvarez announced significant reforms within his department. These included mandatory de-escalation training, new accountability measures, and universal adoption of body cameras. Dana supported these initiatives but recognized they were only the first steps in a much larger journey. "This incident is a stark reminder of the work we still have to do," Dana stated during an interview. "But it also serves as a rallying cry for meaningful change. Reform begins here, and it begins now." Dana Collins' confrontation with Officer Mason Hill had evolved into more than a personal encounter. It had become a powerful symbol, a symbol of the fight for justice, accountability, and the unwavering belief that no one, regardless of their position, is above the law. Weeks after the incident, the fallout was still being felt. Mason Hill was dismissed from the police force, with undeniable evidence supporting Dana's account. His actions became a cautionary tale of prejudice and abuse of power. Sheriff Miguel Alvarez implemented reforms, including bias training, stricter body camera policies, and a public complaint system. "This isn't about one mistake," he said. "It's about accountability and change." Dana's story sparked national conversations. Speaking at events, she emphasized, "This isn't unique. It happens to people who can't fight back. Change must ensure no one else endures this." Civil rights groups and lawmakers rallied behind her message, pushing for nationwide police reforms. Dana championed these efforts in Congress and the media, stating, "Justice means creating systems that prevent abuse and treat everyone with fairness." One evening, Dana received a note. "Because of you, I found the courage to stand up for myself. Thank you for your leadership." It renewed her determination. Returning to the town months later, she met Alvarez, who shared the department's progress. "Thank you for holding us accountable," he said. Dana shook his hand. "This fight belongs to all of us." Driving away, she felt ready for the long road ahead. The fight for justice was far from over. As Dana drove away, the weight of the journey ahead felt lighter, but her resolve remained unshaken. The fight against systemic injustice wasn't just about policy. It was about people, their stories, and the collective will to demand better. Each step forward, from reforms to raising awareness, was a testament to the power of resilience and unity. Dana knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but the voices of those inspired by her courage echoed in her mind. With each mile, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to lead the charge for lasting, meaningful change.